how depressing is it that it has come to this? In a season where our expectations were in the pits, we genuinely need to have a conversation around sacking our manager. In a season where having a productive and decent Premier League season has never been easier. All you have to do really is finish above the might of Nottingham Forest and Bournemouth. We are in a situation where we are going to have a catastrophic season. Now, the reasoning as to why it is so bad is complex, but Enzo Maresca is obviously front and centre of that conversation. Is Enzo Maresca solely responsible? Absolutely not. But should Enzo Maresca be doing far better than he is? 100%. Now, for the record, I don't particularly like Maresca. I don't particularly rate Maresca. I wasn't particularly supportive of the Maresca appointment. He was drastically over-promoted. He is a championship manager. He was plucked directly from a championship club and given one of the biggest jobs in English football. That was a travesty. That was the mistake. And ultimately, it is now churlish of us to get annoyed with a manager who is clearly developing, clearly learning on the job, that he's making teething problem mistakes. Because he is a developing manager. Of course he's making mistakes. You've appointed a young manager who is at the beginning of his career in the ascendancy in his eyes. Of course there's going to be mistakes made along the way. And we are holding him to a standard now that is far higher than he should be held to. But he's been over-promoted. And he has to live with that. Graham Potter was over-promoted. He had to live with that. And Enzo Maresca is now presiding over a Chelsea team that are in freefall. We've won 2 games since Christmas. Since Enzo Maresca decided to tell the world that we were not in a title race, we have won 2 games. We went to Goodison Park on the 23rd of December. If we had won there, we would have gone top of the league. Of course, there were caveats to that. Of course, there were issues with that. And Liverpool had a game in hand and whatever else. But there is something symbolic about moving to the top of the league around Christmas time. We drew that game and we've basically never found any form. Within that period, Enzo Maresca told us that the Standards were not winning the league. Just recently, he's told us that the Standards are not even qualifying for the Champions League. It's a 2-year project, apparently. Qualifying for the Champions League at Chelsea off the back of spending £1 billion, it's a 2-year project. He is so woefully out of his depth. He is so inadequate. It's borderline inept. His in-game management, atrocious. His player management, atrocious. But should we sack him? Would it be right for Chelsea to part ways with Enzo Maresca? Is Enzo Maresca's departure going to suddenly amplify Chelsea? The furtherance of Chelsea will be improved without Enzo Maresca. And now this is where it gets really complex because I'm not sure it does. Now, when Chelsea had standards, Enzo Maresca would have been sacked. In fact, when Chelsea had standards, Enzo Maresca would have never been anywhere near the job. He would have never even been considered for the job. Of course not. But this run of form would have been so unacceptable. Losing to Ipswich in the way that we did, drawing to Sean Dyche's Everton side in the way that we did, the warning signs were there. And there have been countless examples where Enzo Maresca has got it wrong. But ultimately, what does sacking him achieve? What you can't do is persevere with a manager that you know isn't good enough. So if we believe that Enzo Maresca will never be good enough in the future, then of course we have to sack him. And he hasn't really got a leg to stand on if we did. You know, apart from a purple patch, where I think he hit a vein of form and got quite lucky with fixtures and got quite lucky with personnel and was saved on various occasions by the brilliance of Cole Palmer. Apart from that purple patch, it hasn't been very good since he landed. I think he made bad decisions. The way that he treated Raheem Sterling, for example, was a terrible decision on the opening day of the season against Man City. Whether you believe that Raheem Sterling should be playing for Chelsea, whether you believe that Raheem Sterling could do a job for Chelsea, isn't really the point. It's about respect. It's about respect and it's about status. And Raheem Sterling was one of the most decorated players in that Chelsea camp. And to treat him like that was a bad decision. To treat Ben Chilwell in the way that he did was a bad decision. To treat Conor Gallagher in the way that he did was a bad decision. To treat Trevor Chalobah in the way that he did was a bad decision. To make Enzo Fernandez captain off the back of being a mad racist in Argentina was a bad, actually, unforgivable decision. And there are more. So Enzo Maresca is totally responsible for the context of this video. He's totally responsible for there being jeopardy around his job at the club. But realistically, do we want to go back to the drawing board? Do we want to sack yet another manager? I mean, I'm just not sure that we do. I mean, you could argue that he should have never been given the job, and I would argue that. But sacking him now, I'm not sure what the point is. I mean, there isn't a manager in world football that could make this collection of players serious contenders. Like Jose Mourinho 2005 could not make this collection of players a decent squad because we're just not a decent squad. There are no amount of tactical tweaks that can make Mykhailo Mudryk a good footballer. They don't exist. There is no manager that could do that. There is no amount of tactical tweaks or managerial improvisation that can somehow elevate this squad to serious contenders. Like, it's very difficult for a manager to coach professionalism. Professionalism is something that is innate within footballers, isn't it? The drive to be the best. Jose Mourinho didn't need to coach Frank Lampard's professionalism. He coached him in many ways, steered him in the right direction, gave him loads of tips, helped to amplify the brilliance of Lampard. But one thing that Jose Mourinho would not have had to instill in Frank Lampard would have been a professionalism or a desire or a hunger. That's there. Didier Drogba didn't need Carlo Ancelotti in that season where Didier Drogba was totally unplayable in the year where we won the double. One thing that Ancelotti would have not had to do to Didier Drogba is coach his professionalism. Whereas this squad of players, there is no professionalism, but we cannot blame Maresca for that because that isn't the manager's responsibility. Like, we have players who have absolutely no professionalism, some who clearly don't want to be at the club. Like, Christopher Nkunku doesn't want to be there. That's clear for everyone to see, right? Realistically, what can Maresca do about that? Maresca has been lumbered with a player who has absolutely no innate professionalism. He can't coach that. But Jadon Sancho. You've got Jadon Sancho giving it a big one on social media. Embarrassing. You know, what did he say? Freedom. Freedom. Like, if he'd come to Chelsea and scored 15 goals this season, maybe you could say Marcus Freedom. What was he doing with his freedom? He did nothing. He'd been a terrible player for us. And the only good thing about this pitiful vein of form that we're in is if we finish 15th, we won't have to sign him. So there is one sort of major silver lining to this cloud. If we could just plummet down the league, we'd get rid of Jadon Sancho. But Maresca's not responsible for that. Like, Jadon Sancho has had professionalism issues at Manchester City. Like, Dortmund, he was constantly being fined for missing training and oversleeping and missing team meetings. Look at the way that he treated Ten Hag. Ten Hag was good to Sancho. And he took it to social media like a massive child, like a juvenile. This is a player that we decided to sign. This is a player that Clear Lake have looked at and gone, do you know what? Do you know what? The fella that has totally embarrassed himself and disrespected the office of Manchester United manager, like whatever you think of Ten Hag, the office of Manchester United manager needs to be respected and honoured, right? It's one of the greatest offices in world football. Jadon Sancho couldn't care less. Couldn't care less. He takes it to social media. He doesn't even have an argument in private. Look, there are loads of examples where Scholes would have had an argument with Fergie, but he's not putting it on social media. There are loads of examples where David Beckham had an argument with Ferguson, but it's not on social media. Jadon Sancho takes it to social media and pins it to the top of his profile. Pins it to the top of his profile off the back of Erik Ten Hag, giving him time off to find himself because he needs to be looked after and nurtured. It's nonsense. And this is a player that we've gone and signed. How can we hold Enzo Maresca responsible for the professionalism within the camp when we provide him with players who are famously unprofessional? So why sack Maresca? Someone needs to be sacked. Absolutely. Someone needs to be sacked. But I don't really see how that can be Maresca's fault. Like, Enzo Maresca, he's not responsible for Mykhailo Mudryk failing a drug test. He's not responsible for Enzo Fernandez being a nutty racist. He is responsible, though, for making Enzo Fernandez captain. This is where it gets more complex. He is responsible, however, for telling the world that we weren't in a title race. He is responsible, however, for persisting with Robert Sanchez, who clearly proved himself to be the worst keeper in the league. Nut situation, isn't it, that the best keeper at Chelsea is currently playing for Strasbourg? Like, it doesn't make sense. Like, how can we let Renato Vega leave and then we end up with a depleted midfield like this? Renato Vega doing the business in Italy, by the way. You know, if you're going to let Christopher Nkunku leave or Joao Felix leave, I think everybody knows that Christopher Nkunku is the player that has to leave, and Bayern Munich were linked. How we decided to persevere with one or the other and choose Nkunku, it's just baffling. And then, this is the most stark criticism that you can level at Enzo Maresca. It's like the management of the team. Like, I don't think he gets the PR of the job right. You know, he's meant to be a statesman in one of the biggest jobs in world football. I don't think he manages the job well. I don't think he is a particularly good footballing manager either, though. And this is far more cutting, far more relevant. Because if you look at the way that his team's set up, there's always errors. We're always vulnerable. There's always a glitch. There's always a chink of vulnerability. There's always an opportunity to get under the armour of Chelsea. And that is because of his tactics. Like, how many times will Chelsea go 1-0 up this season and not win the game? Like, this is, you know, if that happens once, you go, okay, fair enough, right, we're gonna sort that out. It's basically every game. We go 1-0 up, we don't end up winning the game. Like, think how many times Chelsea have taken the lead in a game of football and ultimately not won it. Brighton recently, 1-0 up, got embarrassed. Man City recently, gifted a 1-0 lead, didn't win the game. Fulham at Stamford Bridge for the first time in 50 years they beat us. Villa, obviously yesterday, 1-0 up, didn't win the game. Crystal Palace, fairly recently, didn't win. Manchester United away, right, 1-0 up, didn't win. Like the examples are just there constantly. We are constantly going 1-0 up. We're constantly getting pinned back. That is an example of bad management. But then I don't even know where I sit on it, because on some level, I don't really want more managerial churn. I don't really want a situation where we have to talk about a new manager system. You know, all this nonsense about manager systems. We're hearing it with Man United and Amorim. Just be a good manager. Just manage the players that you've got. Just play the cards you're dealt. Be Carlo Ancelotti. You know, be Nuno Espirito Santo if you can't be Carlo Ancelotti. Just be good. Oh, I don't have the right players for my system. Grow up. And I don't know if I can be bothered to listen to it all again. A new project, another thing. But we have the 2 easiest games in Premier League football next. Our 2 next games are against 2 Championship teams. We're playing Premier League fixtures, but we have 2 Championship teams. We're playing Leicester and we're playing Southampton, 2 of the worst teams that have ever been in the Premier League. If we do not win both of those games, both of them convincingly, I think that there could be some managerial movement. Whether I want it or not, do you know there's a really weird thing? I don't know if anyone can empathise with this, whether you're a Chelsea fan or not, but have you ever got yourself into a situation with your football team where it sort of wears you out? So I'm not as angry as I've been over the years. When they sacked Lampard first time, I was heartbroken, I was angry, I was full of vitriol and venom. I don't feel like that today. When they sacked Mourinho first time round, I was livid. I was down the ground, in fact. When they sacked Di Matteo, I was heartbroken. It mattered. I was so cut up. Now, I don't know if you feel like this, but there's this weird... the only thing worse than being angry with your football team is sort of not being angry. I'm passive. I feel like there is a passivity among our support. I don't know, we've had 6 managers in 3 years. I just don't know. And yeah, I'm not desperate for Enzo Maresca's head, but equally I'm not desperate for him to stay either. I've got a sort of que sera attitude, which I think is far worse than being either fully in love with a manager in the way that I was with Lampard, or fully anti a manager in the way that I was with Benitez. Fully in love with a manager in the way that I was Carlo Ancelotti, or fully anti a manager like I was Sarri. Because that's emotion, that's from the heart, that gets you. There's just sort of a begrudging acquiescence to this situation. I don't know. And I imagine that would be music to Clear Lake's ears. Because if anyone else is feeling this way, a passive support is so much easier to control than one that's livid. And if the ultimate ambition for Clear Lake is to leave Stamford Bridge, if they're going to try and drive us out of our home, this is what they want, a calm support. So I just don't know. But if we do not win both games, I think that there's a problem. I heard that Jonathan Goldstein talking recently. I think, firstly, it's important to note, Jonathan Goldstein is a Tottenham fan. So, yes, he's on the Chelsea board, and he has said that Maresca is 100% safe this season. But it is important to remember that his loyalty doesn't lie with Chelsea. It's a job. He is one of the best, I believe. He is one of the best property developers in the world. And he is the person that can get things built in London when it's difficult, which again makes me think that there is a link to him and Chelsea leaving Stamford Bridge. But he has said that Enzo Maresca is totally linked to the long-term project. And we are not going to sack a manager and perpetuate this cycle of instability. I don't really believe a word that I hear from anyone in the board, to be totally honest with you, though. So I just don't know. There's no doubt Enzo Maresca has had a hard job, but he has been over-promoted. He has a young, chaotic squad. That's not his fault. He has no leaders in the team. That's not his fault. But Ian Arth makes a pig's ear of situations as well. So I wonder if the board will react. They will look at it and go, we are 1 point off top 4. So as things stand, we're not going to make it. I think most Chelsea fans will tell you that we are not going to make it into the Champions League. But a new manager, a top manager that would come in, I think we would make it. So the board will look at it and wonder, especially if we don't beat Leicester and Southampton coming up. As things stand, Chelsea will not make it into the Champions League. There's no doubt about that. If we persist with Enzo Maresca, we will not make it into the Champions League. Maybe the board will think, roll the dice, roll the dice. But then the board needs to take responsibility, because the reason we're not going to make it is them, solely them. Look, Maresca can take his share of the responsibility, but the reason that we have this squad with no leadership is them. The reason that we have this squad without any real proven winners is them. The reason we have a squad of children is them. The reason why Aston Villa beat us is because they make two impressive, aspirational signings in a window. They bring Asensio in, they bring Rashford in, and what do? Two players at the top of their game. They bring them in, they win the game. Who have we brought in that's going to do that? What's wrong with signing a 30-year-old? What's wrong with signing Michael Ballack? What's wrong with bringing in a player like Mark Hughes, like we did when I was a kid? 30-odd. Bring them in, proven winners. Instead of that, Man United bring in Rashford and Asensio wins them the game. We bring in Dewsbury Hall. Going to win you nothing, mate. It wouldn't win you a raffle. I really look forward to reading these comments, man, because it's just a heartbreaker. Let me know.